Welcome everyone. I am Councillor Lee Hunt, the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development. This meeting is being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting, but there's nobody up there anyway. Housekeeping, safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in the Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking will be on camera. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. So we're going to quickly swing by from my left. We'll start with you, Mr. Maguire, to introduce yourself.
Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
And James from Democratic Services, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. I am James from Democratic Services, Senior Local Democracy Officer. Thank you.
And today we're joined by Tristan Samuels. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chair. Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
And Councillor Brent.
Councillor Ryan Brent, Deputy Group Leader of the Conservative Group.
And Councillor Smythe.
Judith Smythe, Councillor from St Jude Ward and Chair of the Planning Committee.
Very. So on the front of the public document pack, you will all see the information about COVID. I don't intend to read that through. It is there for you to see. I'm not aware of any deputation from the public, James. Thank you very much. There are no apologies for any absences because everybody is here. Declarations of interest. No. So, Mr. Maguire, could we go to item number 3, please, which is the Housing Delivery Test Action Plan?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. The appended to the report for item 3 is the draft Housing Delivery Test Action Plan 2022-2023. Since 2018, local authorities have been judged under the Housing Delivery Test, i.e. the number of homes built in the 3 years preceding the period, judged against the adopted or standardised method for housing requirements. What we have is the 2021 Housing Delivery Target results, published January 2022, talking about the 3 years preceding that, 2018 to 2021. The delivery against the standard method for housing requirements was 54%. Lots of obvious reasons for having a quiet 3 years from 2018 to 2021, but that does require that we produce a housing delivery test action plan because it is obviously below the 95% threshold that guidance requires us to produce that. Consequently, that plan is produced and attached for the portfolio's approval. There are, in summary, paragraph 3.11 of the report, 10 action plan headings, things that the Council is doing and can do to support and increase housing delivery in the local authority area. The recommendation is covered off in the first page of the report, that the Housing Delivery Test Action Plan at Appendix 1 be approved for publication and implementation.
All right then. Members, any questions before we go to comment? Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a question that refers to paragraph 3.3 and then to the recommendation at the end. I'm quite content with the rest of this report. I think it's a fair judgment of where we're up to and why we've had difficulties reaching our housing targets. I do wonder, though, what status this statement is that the council believes that decisions on housing needs should be made by local people in Portsmouth. I'm quite happy to agree with that statement, but it does seem to me that somewhere in there it needs to say it should be based on evidence of the space available for development in the city. Because if I was, I don't know, I was just thinking if I was perhaps a member of the government, a minister or something, and I just thought we were wanting to make our own decisions, I might not be quite satisfied that we thought it through. I would really like to see in there that it is based on evidence of the space available in our crowded city or something like that, because we are a unique city, as it goes on to say in the report. So I just wondered, Chair Spokesman, if you could consider inserting that into the text the two times it turns up.
All right, well, thank you. I'll get Mr Maguire to comment on that, if you would, Mr Maguire.
Certainly. I think just general comment, it's a key distinction. There is a housing need, which is obviously population derived, using whatever methodology one wishes to use to calculate the growth of population. Government has a standard method for calculating that. As I said in here, this council has made resolution in the past. That's what officers are recognising in paragraph 3.3, that the council doesn't agree that that is the correct way of assessing housing need. That shouldn't be confused with availability of housing supply for a constrained space, and there may be lots of different reasons for constraint. Obviously, the sea all around us is a key issue for Portsmouth, though there are other constraints which we've covered in paragraph 3.9 as well. Your actual delivery against that supply will be a lesser number than your need. So if I would probably recommend against trying to suggest that your housing need is constrained by those constraints. Your housing need stays the same, whatever your constraints are. Your ability to deliver against them is constrained. So if one was to calculate the housing need for Portsmouth using a locally derived methodology, you would come to a different number, maybe a smaller number, maybe a large number, depending on what methodology you would need, but it would be irrespective of the constraint. You would then, the next stage, look at how well you could perform against that need for constraint. So I don't believe we want to convolute the two issues of our housing need, whatever methodology, whether it be a locally derived one or a national standard one to be applied, and our ability to meet that, which is obviously a far more complex set of work, which is a separate process within your local plan setting and adopting of a housing requirement.
Thank you. I understand that, and I wondered if that might be the case, but I do think the sentence could be turned around so that it was a bit clearer that I mean, I think in essence it's a bit difficult to say that decisions on housing needs should be made by local people in Portsmouth, because we would have to use objective data anyway. Housing need is calculated for other purposes, and there are objective surveys that can be done on housing need. We still may then not have the land to meet it. So I would like to have seen that turned around a little bit to make it clear that the objective figures are very important. The evidence is very important, and I think this conflates the two. You can leave it as if you like, but I think it doesn't quite sum up what a lot of people in Portsmouth understand, which is that we may have very high housing need, but we haven't got the land, even taking into account all the objectives and the pieces of land that we're releasing gradually over time through the local plan to satisfy all that need.
All right. It seems to me you're saying you're reflecting what's in here anyway. And I think you might be out of step somewhat with what local people here in Portsmouth say about their wanting to that these matters should be decided at a local level. Did you want to say anything, Councillor Brent? We'll move on to comment now, if you want.
Sorry, you misunderstand me. I agree that they say that.
Yes.
But they don't. They also know that there's an objective figure of housing need and an objective figure of the amount of land there is available.
All right.
And they also say that we're overcrowded.
Yes.
I think I'm hearing the same things as you.
All right.
But
good.
This doesn't actually say that.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Brent.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, I don't know what's the best way to do it. I think it's a really good report. I have just got questions, obviously, just to give the appropriate scrutiny, and also questions just for clarity, probably for me as well. I don't know what's best, whether to take a few at a time. I've probably got about 10. So if I just go through them, I think for me, and this might be my misunderstanding, but obviously due to the underperformance of delivery, when it says in 3.4, so when it's below 75%, there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Does that mean that any developer who wants to make a development with housing will automatically get approved? I'll ask a few if that's okay, and I think that's probably the best way of doing it.
I can answer no.
Okay.
Straightforward.
So maybe if you could just give some more clarity in favour of sustainable development, just because when I was reading through it, it seemed that if a developer was to come along with a provision for housing within the development, then that we would have an obligation, not necessary to approve everything, but to approve the majority of them, to ensure that we meet our target. I'll keep going.
Do you mind if I come in on that paragraph?
Hang on a tick. Let's let him get his questions out.
Okay.
Let's just let him get his questions out, and then we'll get Mr. McGuire to sort them as best he can, and then we will definitely come to you, Councillor Smythe, if that's all right. It's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, just these are clarity questions. So am I right in thinking that central government reduced our target of delivery due to the lockdowns and that our underperformance is in relation to the reduced target? I'll just keep asking a few more. Can you just explain what C2 delivery is? Again, that's my naivety more than anything else. So obviously linking it with student accommodation. And just from my sort of understanding when I was reading through it, student accommodation arguably saved our delivery targets to a degree in 18-19. And where this is a 3-year sort of rolling average or whatever it may be of performance, where we're reducing our student accommodation, does that mean we're at risk of being at a lower performance in the next 3 years when this report will come through with the HDT?
Right. Can we hang on just there?
One more if that's all right, and then
yeah.
just to finish off. And again, another slightly concerning thing for me is, as I was reading through it again, maybe my misunderstanding, but is it right that the report, this action plan should have come in place 6 months after I can't remember what it's called, but so I think it was the 19th of January it would have been, or 19th of February. Does that make it so this report should have been at the 19th of July, or are we out of time? So that's just a question, then I'll carry on afterwards. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Mr. Maguire.
I'll probably take those in reverse order just because I was noting them down. Yes, ideally we would have had this at the 19th of July. It's how quickly we can get meetings arranged. There's no particular penalties associated with that. Obviously, the document has been around for a couple of weeks now, so well before the 19th of July. So we're comfortable with that, but as always it takes a while to convert those figures into an action plan, so it's not just given lip service. So that should cover that one. I'm going to take them out of order, apologies. C2 is residential institutions. Under the use classes order, use for the provision of residential accommodation and care to people in need of care other than use within a dwelling house, use as a hospital or nursing home, or use as a residential school, college or training centre. And in Portsmouth, a policy position has been adopted by guidance through the Student Halls SPD to confirm that Portsmouth City Council considers student halls to be C2. It's a point of disagreement. Different authorities define student halls in different ways. Do student halls provide care to their students in locus parentis, or are they simply a C3 occupation? Different professionals will give you a different view, but yes, in Portsmouth, C2 includes student halls, and consequently, yes, if we produce less student halls, they will have a lesser impact on our overall housing need. The housing delivery test has a rule book associated with it, and it has a translation methodology for different types of housing. So student housing has a number of beds per dwelling, so you convert a block of student housing into an equivalent number of homes. Care homes have a number of beds per dwelling, so you can do the same calculation there, so that you can bring it all back to a single comparative unit of dwelling. So you provide less residential accommodation, 2.5 for students, 1.8 for care homes. You can therefore convert any residential accommodation, other than obviously hotels and transient accommodation, into a housing delivery number to go against that overall target. The standard methodology and targets for delivering that HDT, yes, there was a temporary amendment to that to recognise reductions in delivery during the COVID lockdown, so that's accounted for within the calculations you see covered in that. Obviously, it wasn't a Portsmouth issue, indeed it wasn't a UK development industry issue, that it was harder to get on sites and deliver things, and government recognised that in the published results for the relevant year. And then finally, presumption in favour of sustainable development. The presumption for decision taking means approving development proposals that call with an up-to-date local plan without delay. So presumption in favour is decision taking is approving developments that are called with an up-to-date development plan without delay, or where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies that are most important for determining the application are out of date, which when you have an aged plan that isn't meeting its full housing target will be the case, granting permission unless the application for policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a clear reason for refusing the development, or any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework as a whole. In real language, what that means is, yes, you grant plan permission, that's the presumption, unless there is a good reason not to, and indeed the impacts on the SBA is a very good reason not to for the whole of Portsmouth, because of the eutrophication of our southern waters and the impacts to recreational disturbance on birds. And even having resolved that, which obviously we help developers to do through the various mitigation schemes, you still have to do an assessment of whether the adverse impacts outweigh the benefits. It's just that that's a tilted assessment. It isn't just do they outweigh it, they have to outweigh it significantly and demonstrably before you withhold planning permission. In truth, the presumption of favour of sustainable development applies irrespective of your housing delivery test. It's one of the oddities in the drafting of national guidance. We are told to apply a presumption in favour of sustainable development, full stop, and then we are threatened, if you don't perform, you must apply it. Well, we're already applying it, to be honest, and we have, to my knowledge, never refused an application in Portsmouth, certainly in the just past 3 years I've been here, on the basic principle. There's been problems with it, but we have been satisfied that the adverse impacts do sufficiently outweigh the benefits for those occasions when we do have to refuse an application. The vast majority are, of course, improved and negotiated by the planning officers to a state where they can be granted, but an in-principle objection and refusal, I don't recall that ever having occurred. They are refused if they must be refused on their individual merits, because the adverse impacts clearly do outweigh the benefits of delivering that development. I think that was the 5 questions.
Got 5 more, I think.
Somewhere around there, yeah. So thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to read through, I'm just going through the report. It's probably not helpful to point out where I am in the report necessarily. So I know Milton has a neighbourhood plan. And this might be a question for the Cabinet member more so than the officer. Do we feel that more neighbourhood plans would be the way to go to ensure that we improve our delivery on our housing targets? And I'll just keep asking them, and then that's probably the best way of going around it. I will point out this, I know I just sort of sound hypocritical, but so 2.2.6 in the actual report, it says that Portsmouth City Centre and Tipner in particular are considered to have a potential to deliver significantly more development and new homes than was envisaged by the 2012 core strategy. I just want some clarity on this, of whether or not this is a direction, again maybe for the Cabinet member, for the administration to be going away from the city deal in Tipner and trying to look at putting more houses in Tipner West than the city deal had said. So that was 2.2.6 housing delivery on allocated sites. So then, so going over, it says the Table 6 Portsmouth housing needs standard methodology. Is the number, obviously there's I don't know all the phrases, but where we haven't necessarily performed to 95% and above, there are consequences. Are the numbers increasing? I understand that they changed. If we had a current local plan, we potentially would be having to deliver less houses than the standard national methodology. But so just looking at the numbers, are those numbers increasing due to our lack of delivery under 75% as well? That's 2.2.9. And then just something that did concern me. So 2.3.6. So the last sentence in there, it says. So the summer 2018 consultation receiving 6 responses, which 4 were already known sites. So this is about a call for sites to a degree. And it says the autumn 2019 consultation receiving responses relating to 12 sites, 6 of which were already identified for housing. I just wanted to see if there's any clarity what the other 6 were. When I've read through the report at the back, obviously there's comments about the possibility of increasing the housing in Cosham. And I'm just trying to ensure that we're being as transparent and as open and scrutinising every element of the report. There's one more, but I think I'll stick there for a second.
All right. On the Tipner thing, on the Tipner numbers, your group leader and all the other group leaders were at a cross-party local plan meeting at the end of last week. We've been open and frank and transparent about Tipner, and it is 1,250 homes. I'll allow Mr. Maguire to talk about why it's 1,700 on here. I imagine that's in the current local plan. So that's the old local plan. So obviously things have changed, not least the government's housing target numbers, which even a lot of Conservative MPs don't agree with. On the Cosham number, you'll be pleased to hear that as a result of the work that the planning officers have done, this again was talked about in the cross-party local plan working group at the end of last week. That's gone down from the previous 800 and odd number, 840 odd, I think, or 850, down to about 534 for various reasons, including the fact that the Regulation 18 consultation is coming to an end and things are being firmed up as we move towards the Regulation 19 part of the exercise. So officers have been making diligent inquiries with landowners and establishing what they can actually, could actually be delivered on a particular piece of land, and some of those pieces of land have fallen away. Have I got that about right, Mr. Maguire, or not? I don't mind if you say no.
I'd correct a couple of the numbers, Mardy, but yes, about right. Would you like me to have a crack at it as well for clarity? So the Tipner question, first of all, 2.2.6 in the action plan itself. So the 2012 core strategy, you can see the numbers anticipated for Tipner. That's Tipner East and Tipner West, an important distinction, 1,730, and another 500 on Port Solent, PCS1, PCS2, reading from Table 4 on page 7 of the action plan. That was almost quickly superseded by a very small variation by the city deal, which obviously changed those numbers slightly over those 3 sites, Tipner East, Tipner West, and Port Solent. What we're seeing going forward, the current issue is the Tipner East is likely to overperform against the previous allocation, which is only about 600 top of my head. We're going to be pushing 1,000, we think, with Tipner East opportunities there, all subject to planning. Of course, we have a live application for Bellway, which have the smaller half on the southern part. They are significantly, they've responded well to the density needs for that, so they've put some more units in there, and the upper, larger half, Vivid on the northern side of Tipner East, are looking at a well-designed high-density scheme to respond to those needs. So for that reason, we are satisfied Tipner can, as a collective whole, perform better than that opportunity that was identified in 2012. It would be similar to that, if not slightly better than that covered in City Deal, between Tipner East and Tipner West, though obviously the cake may be cut differently across those 2 halves. Port Solent, based on the promotion by the landowner, remains at 500 throughout every one of these iterations, so a similarity there. That paragraph also refers to better performance in city centre, only 1,600 in the city centre identified in the 2012 core strategy. We're looking 4 times that. Real opportunities for a number of tall buildings. The planning committee have granted a number of tall buildings in city centre, and using that methodology for placemaking our city centre development strategy, the adopted, and it's a capacity study rather than a policy, capacity study evidence base for the local plan has identified somewhere 5,000–6,000 homes if we can deliver all of the opportunities that the city centre could realise. There was a Cabinet report earlier today, obviously looking at some of those opportunities through the City Centre North, the first large parcel to come forward, and that's owned by the City Council. So that's 2.2.6. You then asked around the standard methodology in 2.2.9, whether passed on to delivery increases that. The standard methodology approach produces a number, basically the difference between the predicted population growth based on, and there's political choice, it's not fully objective. The government has laid out its ambition to have 300,000 new homes provided and then cut their cloth accordingly, with some variation to the largest of the cities, which we just fall below. So it's not 100% objective, there's a degree of subjective choice from government built within that, but that number itself is then subject to a buffer, an increased percentage. There's a number of different methodological approaches to increasing that percentage, and indeed when we went out to Regulation 18, we saw from our neighbouring authorities different suggestions on how the same number can be calculated. There is guidance buried in the PPG, specifically talking to 5-year land supply, but is arguably applicable across the board, that suggests that buffer isn't in addition to your housing need, but should be brought forward from latter in the plan period. Why that's relevant, because what the housing delivery test performance below 75% tells you to do is go with a 20% buffer rather than a 5% buffer. Now, actually the percentage is irrelevant if it's brought forward from latter in the plan period, because your total number is the same, you're just delivering it in different years. If it's delivered in addition to your housing number, then obviously that would be a larger number. A bit of both is the answer, of course, because if you're delivering 5% more every year as a minimum, and that is the minimum, irrespective if you have perfect delivery forever, you still have to provide 5% more than you'll need to provide choice and flexibility within the market. You will inevitably have 5% more at the end of the plan period if everyone does exactly what we predict them to do, which of course they will not do. So there's a variation around that, and obviously that will be washed out as part of the ongoing work, then subject to examination in public in due course. So that's how the buffer operates. Call for sites. So we maintain a housing and economic land availability assessment, an ongoing database of every available piece of land that we know about in the city that could come forward for housing. We then have to subject that to a sufficiently diligent assessment on the likelihood and its deliverability to come forward. Some of those come from call for sites that we're unaware of. Someone hadn't bought it to market yet. As far as we knew, it was a perfectly happy occupied building, and landowners changed their position. Classic example would be the change in circumstances when Debenhams closed down in the city centre. That was assumed, certainly in the 2012 plan, to continue as a retail site and be that cornerstone of the high street. It won't be. You don't get those sorts of stores anymore, and consequently that's now in. Call for Sites identified that as an opportunity for redevelopment, hence we can get those bigger numbers for housing in the city centre. In that last one, there was a dozen sites come forward. 6 of them we already knew about. We'd had identified through either the fact they are in the live planning process, either pre-application or live planning application process. They may have come forward in a previous Call for Sites, or indeed our own officers may have identified them through local knowledge on that basis, but obviously the landowners and promoters wanted to just be doubly sure that it was on the list, so they put it in. There were 6 new sites identified, none of them of great scale from recollection, that came forward. The full HELAR is published regularly. We've got the 2019 one up at the moment, obviously as part of the ongoing work. We're concluding at the moment. We'll be producing the 2021-22 HELAR in due course, but there's hundreds of sites within there, so 6 new ones to add to that. And similarly, of course, some have fallen away as the landowners are no longer engaging with us or haven't responded to our attempts to reach them to put on there, or have brought forward and delivered them and therefore no longer available for that purpose. Neighbourhood plans, final thing, would they improve delivery on the housing target? Yes and no would be the short answer. Certainly, guidance encourages, and professionally I would encourage the council to support neighbourhood plans. They give a really important voice for local people to help guide the development that will occur. It is incumbent upon councils and neighbourhood areas, so we only have one designated, they have to set themselves up first of all as a forum. They can formally ask us to tell them how many homes they need to make room for in their neighbourhood plan. So on that basis you would expect a similar number. Obviously it's within the gift of a neighbourhood to want to over-provide for housing, but in light of the significant constraints the entire city faces, there's not a lot of the parts of the city that could provide more than we have identified. It's not that we've got a number of sites that we're saying we're not going to bother developing anything that you can get a house on. We've had the staff look at and had the team evaluate for availability. Obviously they do have some opportunity to increase housing numbers, because neighbourhood forums, minimum of 21 people living in a neighbourhood, will have probably better local knowledge than my team do. So while we ask everyone to tell us if there's sites available, you don't have to be the landowner, anyone can raise a site with us. We obviously scrape through our own records, whether that's property owner or as a planning authority, and we use the local knowledge of our staff in the planning authority and elsewhere. It may well be, down on the granular level of a street-by-street basis, a neighbourhood forum member might have knowledge of a piece of brownfield land that we didn't know about, that they are aware may come to market in our plan period, and we don't know that. So they do have that opportunity for local intelligence that obviously is limited by the practicality, so they should be able to support increased delivery, and indeed they certainly are prohibited from reducing housing numbers. Their guidance is quite clear on that. They're obliged to ensure they help us deliver that. So they're a positive influence, and on that basis obviously to be encouraged to deliver that. I think that was all the questions you had.
Yeah, just to answer your direct question, we would always encourage neighbourhood plans if people want to, but it's entirely up to the local community. Councillor Smythe.
Very much, Chair. The query I had on this one, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Charlie, but it was one of the same paragraphs that Councillor Brent looked at, was the paragraph where, at the very beginning, where it talks about sustainable development. Is there a specific technical reason to, a specific technical meaning of the word sustainable in the context of this report?
It's the same as that given in the National Planning Policy Framework.
Which is?
I'll give you the verbatim, so yeah, which I should be able to do from memory, but I will. So I can read out the whole thing, but I shall paraphrase. We use it. Paragraph 8 of the National Planning Policy Framework is the key issue, and it is a paraphrase of the Brundtland definition of sustainability and talks to those three interrelated objectives: an economic objective, a social objective, and an environmental objective. Obviously, underpinning that Brundtland definition of sustainability is also that intergenerational equity to ensure that the meeting the needs of the current population doesn't impinge our ability to meet the needs of future generations. So it's a fairly standardised definition, been knocking around since the mid-70s, and is embedded as a definitional position into the National Planning Policy framework, has been updated accordingly as the similar definition has gone through various national treaties and agreement, and then washes out as a presumption in favour of sustainable development in paragraph 11 of the NPPF.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Thank you. And thank you also for the clarifications about the 2021 position on table 4, paragraph 225. Clearly, it'd be quite good to see when we do more work on the local plan, presumably we'll see a slightly different set of numbers in that table.
Councillor, if I may, obviously members will recall there, following the last meeting, cross-party meeting on the local plan with leaders, a request was made that a briefing is given on a group basis to each group, which has been arranged now for August. There's half a dozen dates in there. I can't recall whose is who. The primary purpose of that is to provide that update I did say, and I don't wish to contradict Councillor Abbott, I did say I would confirm that. So within there, I will be presenting updated data that confirms that Cosham, for example, has changed from a previous assumption regulation 18 of 740 homes to now 546. And obviously, I'll take members through the reasoning behind that. But as I say, Tipner City Centre changed equally, well, actually significantly differently, but equally those changes have occurred on a number of other strategic sites across the city.
All right then, so...
Thank you. I believe we did receive dates for those. At least we received a date for that today in the email. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, good. So, and your leaders have obviously got all of that information, and hopefully they'll be talking to you about it and setting up the dates for you all to be briefed. I did wonder if you could all be briefed together at the same time to speed it up a bit, but that wasn't what the individual group leaders wanted. So, and I understand that, but it does delay it a little bit more, but not by much, not dramatically anyway. All right, well, I've listened to everything, okay? And so some of the questions I think were sort of pussyfooting around about under delivery of the housing targets, but over that 3-year period, the thing is 2000, and this is always the same, people don't seem to get it, you know, the City Council gives permissions for these homes. So in that 3-year period, 2,700 homes were permitted by the local planning authority on behalf of the City Council, but only 1,261 were delivered. And as Theresa May said in the House of Commons on the 20th of October, I think it was last year, she said we do need to build more homes, but we won't do that by forcing local authorities to grant more planning permissions to developers so that they can build more homes to bring the price down. She was talking about the price there. And to touch on a matter that you raised, Councillor Smythe, the Romsey MP, Caroline Noakes, she said local councils were better able to decide when new housing should be built. And she said let local councillors who have a track record of delivery carry on delivering. I'm also aware that in the House of Commons that Theresa May, a not insignificant person who has an interest in housing and housing delivery, she also said that just because you give planning permission or you create a target of, let's say, 17,700 homes or whatever it turns out to be in the end, they won't all get built. And I'd be surprised if they did all get built. So just because you have these targets and you try to deliver up to them, I mean, the government has a right, really, to look at its policy and say it wants 1 million homes built, 300,000 a year. But you can't force developers to build them all. They just may not do so. And we've got examples in this city, one down Fratton Road, where we gave permission at the former shoe shop cinema for, I think it was 65 homes. And I can't remember the applicant, but probably wise not to mention the name, but it was a housing association. They were going to do 65, and I think that is now expired. And it still sits there. And then, of course, we've got land banking as well. So all these things come in to frustrate all of our attempts to deliver up to the numbers that the government would like us to do.
Chair, just to...
One moment. And I remember Theresa May also, in the House of Commons, said that the housing system is broken. She said that this can be traced back to lack of action, and I think we all agree. We've agreed in this chamber. I know Councillor New has agreed housing policy in this country is not working, is failed. Back to the lack of action of governments of all colours, with not enough homes being built over many decades. So the government has a target, in my view, a political target, and we have an obligation. There's an obligation upon us to try and meet those targets, and it creates difficulties and expectation and excitement that perhaps cannot be matched. A bit like a drunken night out, I guess, but we all know about that. Councillor Smythe.
I was going to build on that, Chair, just to say that there's a tremendous amount of frustration also about the fact that planning permissions have been issued on Debenham site in Palmerston Road and on Knighton Lee. And if I'm down there talking to local people there, it's almost half the complaints and worries that people have are about those two sites not being developed. And it's difficult to explain to them that there's absolutely nothing we can do as a planning authority on that, nor does giving a planning permission give us any right to assess whether or not the person who's applying for it is a developer with serious intent.
Yeah, indeed. All right then, so we've had a good old chat about the Housing Delivery Test Action Plan. Anybody want to make any final comments? No. So I would agree the recommendations, Ms. Maguire. All right, thank you very much indeed. Thank you all very much for your questions on that and your comments. So we'll swiftly move across the pages to agenda item number 4, which is options for increasing planning committee capacity. Mr. Maguire, over to you.
Thank you. So, members asked for a report to be prepared to look at the options. There are a number of items awaiting planning committee consideration, waiting for a capacity within the agenda for determination. As members are fully aware, of course, the vast majority of applications are dealt with directly by officers under delegated authority in accordance with best practice, and what can be determined by officers and what must be reserved for determination by the planning committee is covered by your scheme of delegation. Common practice, obviously, across all local planning authorities. The specific individual criteria I've summarised in paragraph 3.2 of the report, various paragraphs, para 50 to para 58, describe the different thresholds and trigger points to bring things to committee. Applying those triggers and thresholds means you have, when this report was prepared, over 100 cases waiting for committee determination. I've given a breakdown of those cases in para 3.3. I do say this is, at the time, we've had a couple of committees since then, so a couple of, have been done and a few more obviously popped up on the bottom end, so these are somewhat indicative numbers, but were accurate at the time of drafting. What members therefore may wish to consider, and Councillor Hunt, for you to consider, is whether any changes to that scheme of delegation to increase the level of delegation, i.e. remove the necessity for committee determination, would be beneficial to reduce the wait time for these applications. Currently, applications are having to wait something in the region of 9 months to have sufficient space on an agenda to be determined. Clearly changing that level of delegation, so applications don't have to be determined by planning committee and can be determined by officers, would dramatically increase the rapidity of determination and decrease that waiting time. Alternatively, or in addition to, the number of committees could be increased, either overall or with subcommittees, etc. Different authorities take different routes. There are clear financial implications that it's incumbent upon me to flag. However, obviously the scheme of delegation has no negative financial implications. It's cheaper to do an application at delegated officer than it is with committee. We don't have to come into this room and pay someone from Democratic Services to sit there taking notes, to take the simplest option, and also that reduction in time itself is a fundamental saving. So changes the scheme of delegation to in any one of those paragraphs, and I've highlighted some thoughts within the report where the biggest impact could be achieved, would have a financial benefit to the overall budget, or more importantly, wouldn't need any further approval. It's within your gift to determine, as it's within your budget parameters. However, increasing the frequency of planning committee one way or the other would have financial costs, and while you could express a desire, should you wish, as a portfolio holder, to support and increase that, funding would need to be identified. There is no reserve in the planning authority, so funding would need to be identified to provide the additional officer resources necessary to deliver increased committee numbers. So that's a more difficult one to do. The Senior delegation issues, therefore, is where I anticipate we'll have most of the discussion today, and thus I focused the significant part of the report on where those changes could occur to have the best bang for your buck, so to speak, and make those changes to increase that efficiency. But I've also provided a rough estimate, and it is only that, a rough estimate of the sort of funding you may need to seek should you wish to try and increase the frequency of planning committee. But to be absolutely clear, that would require further resolution, probably by Cabinet or by other authority elsewhere in the Council to bring that frequency matter forward, whereas a scheme of delegation is something that could obviously be given near immediate effect, and obviously that would immediately change the forecast determination period for a large number of applications that are awaiting determination. Very happy to take any questions.
Any questions, Councillor Smythe?
Before I get on to a suggestion, I wondered if you could give us some indication what other authorities do here, how far out on a limb we are. We did look at this scheme of delegation, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and as far as I know, it's had a beneficial effect on reducing numbers, and I haven't heard any adverse responses from the public on the number of deputations or objections that have to come before we went to committee. So I think that my impression is that those changes have gone down all right. And if you could just comment on that. I haven't had any comments back. But for example, looking at the paragraph 51, 53, 56 and 57, what do other authorities do? First of all, about member requests. Secondly, about non-residential floor area. And I'm not sure whether we shouldn't qualify that a little bit anyway. And 57 particularly, the number of adverse representations. What sort of comparisons are we looking at with other local authorities?
So just to run through those, so paragraph 53, we've included a threshold, so the largest applications are determined by the planning committee. Not an uncommon position, of course, because by definition one would expect the largest applications to have the most significant impact, and therefore planning committee determination. That threshold, which we've largely just cut and pasted the major definition, so major is a clue there, they're important, into that. Other authorities I know do use a different figure. Birmingham, top of my head, I can't remember if it's 3,000 or 5,000 square metres, it's one of the two. I'd have to go and check, but that threshold is pretty common across the board. There are authorities that do not have a threshold of that nature, and the logic of that, if I can suggest, is probably on the no harm, no foul basis. If people aren't objecting to it and you have a way for people to object and bring it to committee, which obviously we'll come on to in a second, paragraph 57, does it matter if it's large? If it doesn't hit any of those other thresholds, then maybe it's not of significant concern. I know, for example, having spoken to one of our officers who worked for a long time at Birmingham, the reason they had that threshold, which is actually very applicable I think for Portsmouth as well, is because they had a large number of shed applications, big warehouse developments, and indeed our own planning committee have commented on this when they've been asked to, a couple of cycles ago, look at an application in the middle of an industrial estate, pretty much renewal of an existing warehousing structure, which nobody was bothered about, because why would you be? It was just changing the roof of a warehouse, but it was over 1,000 square metres, but it had no objections whatsoever, no concerns from the Highway Authority, so on and so forth, and consequently, while it is technically a major application, in reality it really wasn't. So removing that paragraph 53 requirement obviously wouldn't in any way prohibit the other aspects of the scheme kicking in, statutory consultees, members' objections, bringing things forward, but would have an impact, as I've described, I forget which paragraph 4.5 of the report. The other significant one, the adverse representations, paragraph 57, you mentioned. I've covered a quick summary, which indeed was the same summary I provided in November 2021, of where local authorities that were potentially comparable would be. I see Southampton City Council, 5 letters there, Winchester, 6 or more, covered in. 3 is pretty normal, I would say. It's not, but it is very much making that judgment across the board of where you think you want to draw that line. Obviously, it's not really comparing apples on apples in different places, because when you do make those changes, residents and communities can respond accordingly. You know, if someone was going to go out and encourage their neighbours to object, if you set it at 2, they can encourage 1 neighbour. If you set it at 12, they can encourage 11 neighbours. So it can be, I won't say abused, because that's perfectly fair and proper, and in fact advantageous the more people know about planning applications. But obviously residents will necessarily respond as may be to whatever threshold you may set. You're quite correct. Back in November 2021, we did change the scheme then, and change from 1 objection with a deputation request to 3 objections, irrespective of deputation requests. So there was 2 matters conflated into that. Actually, people had to come along to speak to bring it to committee, which obviously somewhat penalised those that didn't wish to make a deputation. And we could have had 1,000 objections, and without a deputation test, it's still delegated. That doesn't seem right. So that 3 is obviously significantly improving the quality of access to democratic decision making by removing the obligation on the individuals to make a deputation. Whether 3 should become 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 is a matter of a judgment based on where the overall balance of benefit and harm lies. There is again, to throw another phrase into it, that justice delayed is justice denied. If people are having to wait 9-10 months to make a statement or to gain their planning permission, that's obviously significantly harmful to individuals, to businesses, to people's jobs and livelihoods and well-being. So those delays, which are obviously intrinsic in any threshold you set, are causing harm, but obviously by putting in that higher number, it will mean that schemes that have a low number of objections, so there's still a small number of people concerned, wouldn't necessarily get the planning committee consideration. Obviously objections, whether they are aired at the planning committee or simply assessed by planning officers, are given exactly the same degree of scrutiny and attention by professional officers in producing the recommendations, the authorising managers when making decisions, or the planning committee when it makes its decisions. So in no way are people excluded from the decision process. It's just the procedural approach to considering those objections, which obviously would change if you change that number 3 to a different number.
Go ahead, Councillor Small.
Okay. Another question. I remember the applications that we've had when they've been large industrial, non-residential floor areas. I wondered if it might be helpful to put that if they're in an industrial estate or an area zoned for industrial use, we wouldn't want to see them however large they were. But there may be just the occasional instance when somebody wanted to put something in a exceptional position that might make it something that we should look at if it was very large. That's just a thought I had. The other thing is, I think do we know anything about what other authorities do about member requests? The one that stands out from this list is 56 out of the 117 due to a member request, and I wondered if you, Councillor Hunt, had thought about making it a 3 or more members who could request, and perhaps they should come from, this isn't a political point planning, but perhaps they should come from at least two political parties. I think we should do something about paragraph 51 if we can, and I did send you in an email a suggested amendment to that.
I've read the email, and I've got advice on it from Mr Maguire and legal advice from Juliet Gill. On paragraph 51, member request 56, is that completely correct?
So at that time of drafting 56, yes, two are individual members bringing forward applications within their ward, and a number of them are a bespoke concern that have been raised regarding a particular change of use between 6 and 7 or 8 bed HMOs.
And the other ones, the HMO ones? the 54.
Yeah, 54 of those and 2 others at the time of drafting.
Yes. So that was a request by the committee. So it's not quite clear there, I agree. But that was
It wasn't a request by the committee, I don't think.
The HMO one was the committee and the council generally agreed with the leader that all the sui generis HMOs would come to the planning committee. And as yet, I haven't heard anything back from the planning committee through, I don't know, but there are some appeal decisions coming up in, I think, October.
There's some coming up tomorrow.
All right. Which may inform the committee as to how they wish to proceed into the future, but I don't think they're going to give up just yet. We may need a few more appeals. All right. So, in fact, member requests that I'm interested in is 2 out of those 56, which are the general type of references.
Okay, this report doesn't make that entirely clear.
I agree. And so I've clarified that now.
Had thought it was just
yes,
the leader of the council who wanted to make requests.
No, I think that you only have to look at the way the planning committee goes most weeks, and when he did it, there's been a push by the planning committee cross-party, across the members, to have the HMOs brought. If there isn't, you should let him know, and things might change. Okay. Councillor Brent.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it's a really good report, and I quite like reports that give options with costed options. I think that's useful for members. I think that the second recommendation, I think, is a wise recommendation to increase the frequency of planning committee meetings. I think that will ensure that we're being as efficient as possible in the backlog and any future applications. I do have severe hesitation about the first recommendation. I know that there's a constitutional working group being set up. Is that a better forum so we can work cross-party to ensure we're representing the electorate to the best that we can, and any change to the scheme of delegation, just in my opinion and the opinion of all of my group, would say that we don't want to be seen to be stifling democracy to a degree. So, Chair, this would be a request to sort of just think about, obviously, as it's your decision, is do we change that to take it to the constitutional working group to look at a change of the scheme of delegation, just because I think it's important to reflect on what message that sends to the public, and are we sending a message that we just want to get rid of the backlog and potentially look at reducing democracy? I don't think that's the right message to send. I think it's something to consider.
All right, thank you. Now look, the first thing I did when I came into this new role was to look at the backlog. No one in the council chamber can escape the pressure that has been put onto the administration and onto officers to reduce the backlog. We even had the member for Portsmouth North come here and kind of tell us off, because she said that the planning, and we've heard it from members across the council too, that the planning system is not fit for purpose. I think all of that was unfair, quite frankly. That's on the one hand. So we've been under great pressure, especially from your colleagues, Councillor Brent, to reduce the backlog. Having said that, we must understand that this city council has seen its income reduced by £100 million for over about a decade now. You've heard from Mr. Maguire that the planning authority does not have any reserves. Believe you me, I have tried. So over the last 6 weeks I have thought about not much else, because I understand, as your colleagues have been telling us in particular, that there are people out there who want their planning matters resolved. So therefore, I have decided that is what we are going to do. So I've listened very carefully. There is an old English saying, you can't have your cake and eat it. So you guys particularly, and I agree, want us to reduce the planning backlog, and I hope that certainly in the general applications, the sorts of applications that we hear complaints about in council meeting after council meeting, I hope that they will speed it up will be speeded up by about half. And if you read the report, where's it gone? It talks about reducing them from, I think it's 54 outstanding general applications down to about 24. Yeah. Yes, I've underlined it, 415. So if the threshold of adverse representations required to require committee consideration was raised from 3 to 4, this would reduce by 10, which is not sufficient to do what your group in particular wants us to do, and indeed so too to my group, and so too to the Labour group, all members, and including people who care about people having to wait for a year before their planning application is resolved. But if you was raised from 3 to 6, this would reduce it by 24. So that's just about half, just slightly under half. So when I was thinking about all of this, I also took into account the fact that members can use their right to have a matter brought to the planning committee. I also read Councillor Smythe's email to me, which was very handy and very useful, and I thought, you know, maybe we can go there a bit later if people try to circumnavigate the system by starting to bring the 3 people getting together and bringing stuff to the committee, perhaps, I'm fairly saying, unnecessarily. But if this City Council, all of us, are serious about bringing down the backlog, then we all have a part to play in this. I agree that on the one hand, that democratic, there has to be a balance, so there will be a slight democratic deficit, but on the other hand, I have to balance this up against the real need for people up in Drayton, Farlington and Copner and Hilsea and all those other places and across the rest of the city who want their planning applications determined speedily. Then we have to move towards that trigger number, because the money plainly is not there. I have pushed in the cabinet, I have tried, I've written to Chris Ward, and there's just no money available. So it starts off at about 184,000, but then you've got to look at the servicing for extra committees by democratic services, and the legal support that is needed. So that is an added cost, and I reckon that probably takes it up to about £250,000, and £250,000 is getting on for, I think, about a 0.5% to 1% rise in council tax. So the money is not there. I just finished this sentence. The money is not there, so I can't agree the second recommendation, but I do intend to reduce so far as I can, and I hope, the committee backlog down by half. So from 12 months or thereabouts, 9 to 12 months, down to 5 or 6 months for the wait. That is a much better outcome for all those people who have been waiting for such a long time. So before I wind up, Councillor Smythe.
I had anticipated that we wouldn't be able to find that money, but I did want to make it clear that the members of the Planning Committee with whom I have had this discussion, and as Chair of the Planning Committee, we were all up for doing extra work as a Planning Committee. There was no, it would have been quite difficult to fit in an extra 8 meetings in the year, but I certainly take it very seriously as a Chair of the Planning Committee that one of my jobs is to reduce the backlog. So I wouldn't want the public to get the view that the actual committee itself were unwilling to help in this, because we very much are willing to help. And if there hadn't been this extra cost on it, or if you had found the money for it, we would have made it work because it's such an important issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for slowing me down as well, because it lets me think a little more. Because the first thing I did when I took the chair of the planning committee was to move the cycle from 4 weeks to 3 weeks. And we must not also forget that between April and May last year, thanks to the effort of the officers, they had that period where they focused entirely on looking at getting out decision notices. So that is completely, as I understand, Ms Maguire, almost wiped out the delegated backlog. Would that be correct?
Obviously, since then, we have some more. We actually made an enormous inroad, taking a backlog for around 300 down to a backlog of around 90 at the time. Yeah.
All right. So I have I'll come to you in a moment before I wind up here. I have taken this matter very seriously indeed. I have listened very carefully in the council chamber. I have listened very carefully to deputations that were made here even recently. And I have tried to find the money. The monies are not there. And I'll wind up in a minute. There was something else I was going to say, but and I've already mentioned the fact that, Councillor Brent, that members can, if they're not happy with an application in their area that falls foul of this rise, as it were, they can always bring it to the committee using their authority, and I won't be going with a representation that was made about fettering the ability of members to bring an application to the committee by saying it requires 3 of you to do it. So I'm not going to go down that route, not for the time being. Anyway, and as I must stress, this relies on cooperation across the whole of the council. Councillor Brent.
Thank you, Chair. It's only really a quick one. I think just maybe a slight rebuttal just to ensure that we're being open and transparent. I think obviously the Portsmouth North MP Penny Morton did make a deputation where that she was highlighting efficiencies. I think just looking at a report which has been written by an officer where it says a full process review using the council system thinking found that there were a number of areas where efficiencies can be created and process wastage removed. I think the officers do a fantastic job and we've done a really good job at reducing the backlog. And the last thing I just want to make really clear is the decision that you're going to make today is the optics that it sends is that we are looking for efficiency over democracy, and that is my worry.
Well, I would have to take issue with there, Councillor Brent. What we're looking at is resolving people's planning applications in a timely manner. And as we've seen that there are other local authorities nearby, including Winchester, which was Conservative run until fairly recently, whose scheme says 6. I completely agree with you, and I wish it weren't so. But we have had to cope, the council's had to cope with a whole range of issues, not least the reduction in money, funding, COVID, and the nitrates issue, which have all added up to cause all of these this backlog. And indeed now we're seeing those HMO applications come forward too. So I am grateful for what the committee does. It is a hard old slog sometimes, and you have to really think on your feet. I hope this doesn't turn into a war in the council chamber over a slight change in the trigger from 3 to 6, because the benefits, the balance I've looked at, I agree, is not ideal, but the balance is that we resolve all of those people who write to you and others complaining about the fact that their application is not being determined. Their democratic right also matters. I understand exactly what you're saying. So what I'm going to do is that I've decided to amend the scheme of delegation for planning decision making by the deletion of paragraph 53 of part 2 section 5b brackets Director of Regeneration of the Constitution, and the amendment of paragraph 57 of part 2 section 5b brackets Director of Regeneration of the Constitution, so that the threshold applied to a requirement for committee determination is where 6 or more adverse representations based on material planning decisions have been received. Now I say that, and I'll come back to yourself again, Councillor Brent, because people's democratic right have not been removed, because if they are determined about an issue in their street or their road, they can come to you and say, I want that matter referred to the planning committee. So they have that route, and that is a safeguarding measure as far as I am concerned. I'm also agreeing that those larger applications, the warehouses mentioned in paragraph 53, they too should be delegated, because we have people sat in the planning committee scratching their heads when these things come to the committee, and there's apparently no reason for it. The members also scratch their head when members do refer things and then they never show up and say why. And that's something I think perhaps, I want to focus on a little bit more somehow. So I think I've made my decisions and I've set them out, I've reasoned them, and you want to come in a little bit more.
I'm reluctantly happy with those. I think it's exactly what I would do if I was in your shoes. But could we make sure that we monitor whether there are complaints about this from the public, and whether or not, and to make sure that it does make the difference that we want on getting rid of reducing the backlog? Some way of monitoring. I think last time we made an amendment to the scheme of delegation, we did ask for that to be looked at, to be monitored up to a point, and I would think it would be helpful this time in case we do discover that there is a great democratic deficit and we're doing something that people are really objecting to.
All right. Even in those circumstances, if that comes up to the council, every time I will ask the particular person raising it, find me £250,000 or thereabouts in order to do it. Now, I won't dwell on it, but that is the situation, I'm afraid, and I'm very sorry about it. But there we are. We're going to halve the backlog of general applications. Nothing will happen to the HMOs. They will still continue to come, but we'll have to see what the various appeals say and see what members think about that in due course. All right? Thanks ever so much, everybody. Have I been quite clear, Mr. Maguire, where we are? You're very clear what we've done. All right. I'm most grateful to you both for coming along today and for all your questions and comments. They are relevant, and I do listen, and hopefully you have at least that bit of confidence in us. All right? Thanks a lot, Brian. Thank you, Judith. That's the meeting over.